Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional League, Dynasty League, PPR League, IDP League, even Daily Fantasy Football League. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss everything there is to know about fantasy football. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah, and we are back again with another episode for you guys today. And I know it is the end of the season, and I know we're the countdown to 2017 of the NFL season begin practically the Monday after the Super Bowl. Well, you know, there is no offseason here at the GSMC Podcast Network, and we're always going to be here for your fantasy football needs throughout the offseason. Well, the offseason is getting off to a pretty good start. Not a really good start, but, well, I shouldn't say good start, but it's getting off to, it's going pretty much running. It's going pretty much running right now. Well, yesterday, the New York Giants released two starters yesterday, Victor Cruz and Rashad Jennings. Well, Victor Cruz was a very good fantasy receiver in his first two seasons of the league. Actually, his first three, I should say. And then he got hurt in 2014. He got hurt and was a lost cause in fantasy football ever since. And he literally didn't play in 2015. He was off the field, recovering. Then he finally got back on the field for 2016 and didn't really quite get back to the level that he did from 2011 and 2012 when he burst onto the scene. He did have some real good games this year, Victor Cruz. He did it week 16 against the Philadelphia Eagles. He practically had the most targets he's ever had at 13, 84 yards. And then, he did have 91 yards in week 2 against the Saints, which was the most he had of the year. So he did have some good moments, but it was kind of tough for him to consistently do it on a high level. So, cutting Victor Cruz saves a $7.5 million in cap space. Victor Cruz had 39 receptions last season. That is the fifth fewest among the 53 NFL receivers to play 700 snaps in 2016. So his $9.4 million cap hit for 2017 would have been the 15th highest among all receivers. So his rankings for 2016, he has 71 targets, ranked at 48, 39 receptions, ranked at 49. He only had one touchdown, which was tied for 50th. So pretty much not a really good year for Victor Cruz there. But honestly, his fantasy outlook looking forward, I just think he's someone that pretty much is kind of like going to be off the radar. Honestly, I don't think he's going to. I personally don't think he's going to go back to that level that he was. He had so many injuries that kind of made him lose the feet work a little bit. Because a lot of the injuries were on the lower body, and as a receiver, you have to move your lower body a lot, obviously. But you got to move your upper body too. But, most of the movement comes from the feet, in the legs, and all that. And I still think he will go on to an NFL team and contribute in some way or somehow. I did say on the football show, I think the New England Patriots should take a look at him. I do think he can do really good things there. But as far as fantasy value goes, I do think that Victor Cruz is officially done as a fantasy contributor. He was a pretty good waiver wire pickup early of the year in 2016, but of course, he was inconsistent and was pretty much droppable at the midpoint of the season. And pretty much, I think he's someone that's going to be off the radar in fantasy. I think he's someone that you really should stay away from no matter where he goes. And honestly, if he does end up being productive again in 2017, he's no doubt a waiver wire pickup. But when that time comes, the time will come, and I will talk about it. But as of now, he's someone I think that you should stay off the radar from. And the Giants did release Rashad Jennings too. He was he was the starting running back heading into the year. He counted for over 3,000 million against the cap in 2017. So releasing him frees up $2.5 million in cap space. So Rashad Jennings was probably one of the worst starting running backs of the year. He averaged 3.3 yards on 181 rushes last year. That's the second worst of any player with at least 150 rushes. So that list goes to Todd Gurley. He had the lowest at 3.2, Rashad Jennings 3.3, Jeremy McKinnon 3.4, and Devontae Booker 3.5. So Rashad Jennings, he's 31 years old. He averaged the second lowest yards per attempt with at least 150. He's been in the Giants for 3 years. He had a career high in 2015 with 863, but this year he just didn't have it. He lost some work to Paul Perkins, who I think is going to be a great fantasy option next year. But when I look at Rashad Jennings, he's 31. I don't think he's going to. I don't think a team's going to sign him to be a starter. I do think he is still replaceable as a. I still think he has. I still think a team will take a chance on him to be at least like a role player, at least to build some depth, in the backfield, because Rashad Jennings did come onto the scene as a backup. He's been a backup, to begin his career. Even in Oakland, when he was a backup there for 1 year, he started due to injuries of Darren McFadden and other running backs on that roster, so that earned him a starting job with the Giants, who signed him to be a starter, and he just didn't live up to it. The highest he had with the Giants was 4.4 in 2015, and even that wasn't even a huge year. He only had 3 touchdowns that year. I just don't think Rashad Jennings. I actually didn't like him coming into the year. I kind of liked him as your RB3. And, the Giants, I do think they have a really good running back on their hands for 2017, and Paul Perkins. Paul Perkins is someone I really like heading into this year. So it seems like Paul Perkins is kind of slated to be a star. I think it's time to hype up Paul Perkins now, people. I think it's time to hype it up. He averaged 4.1. He didn't have a touchdown on the ground. He didn't actually have a touchdown yet at all. But he is someone that came on late into the scene. He is someone that could contribute as a starting running back. He looks like he is the running back of the future right now. And, the Giants, they need a running back to contribute to this offense, because that's been one of the things that hindered their offense this year was the running game. I do know they got Sterling Shepard, they got Odell Beckham. But they honestly, I think if they had a running back, it could really help out Eli Manning. And Eli Manning's not getting any younger, guys. I think he still has a chance to compete. I think the Giants are going to bring in some guys to help Eli Manning compete. And I do think they're going to sign some running backs there, because I think Bobby Rainey is also a free agent as well. He was the backup running back last year. So I'm all in on Paul Perkins right now. As of now, I think he is a very good, as of right now, I think he's a second or third round pick that can move up potentially. But as of right now, I do like Paul Perkins. I do like him as an RB2 right now. And we'll see how he plays to be an RB1, because this is a pass-first offense, as we have seen over the past couple of years. But I'm all on the Paul Perkins hype train, and I do think he is someone that's going to be valuable. I was high on him late last year, and I do think he is going to be the starter there. I do think he is the one that should get that position right now. But it depends. It remains to be seen what the Giants do in the offseason with the offensive side of the ball. Whoa, I'm going to take my first break here. I'm actually going to talk about running backs again. Most specifically, I'm going to talk about Lesean McCoy. He's actually very upset. I'm going to tell you why he's upset and what I think about it, and I'm going to try to break it down as best as I can, best as I can from a fantasy perspective. When I get back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And Lesean McCoy is very upset. Yesterday on Twitter, he was really upset. He let his feelings known about a list that came out by Pro Football Focus that he wasn't even on the list. So Pro Football Focus came out with their top 101 players of 2016 yesterday. And Lesean McCoy was not on the list. He was snubbed. And I agree, he was kind of snubbed on a little bit. I really think he should have been on the list. But then again, this is literally every player. This also has offensive lineman, defensive lineman, pretty much every position there is. So there's a reason why he may have not been on this list. Maybe he just wasn't maybe he just wasn't better than those football players. But as a running back, he was one of the top running backs in the league, and it's kind of a shame that his year really didn't get a whole lot of attention. Well, Lesean McCoy took to Twitter. This is what he said. This is a direct quote from his Twitter. All right, quote, at Pro Football Focus, "You guys suck. Bunch of nerds who never play a lick of football in your whole life," end quote. So that is a direct quote from Lesean McCoy's Twitter account. And, I do think he might have got snubbed. And, I do have the list here. It has guys. Tom Brady's at number 1, so no question about that. But there was 5 running backs that cracked the top 101 rankings. And Ezekiel at 22, one of the best fantasy running backs this year. David Johnson, probably the best running back in fantasy this year. Le'Veon Bell, the best overall back in the NFL. He's probably going to be another high draft pick in fantasy leagues this year. J.H.I. At 31, he had a breakout year. I think that may have been a little high, but he came on late this year, I think around October, with those 200-yard games. So he is on the list. You got Jordan Howard at 75. He was a rookie and he had a pretty productive fantasy year in a pretty bad Chicago Bears team. So you look at Lesean McCoy here. He had a year where he finished with over 1,600 yards from scrimmage, 14 touchdowns. He was the focal point in Buffalo's offense this year. He averaged 5.4 yards a carry. That's the highest ever in his year. Lesean McCoy, I believe, he's in the prime of his career. He's only 28 years old, so I do think he has at least 2 to 3 good years left in him. This is probably the second best season he's ever had. 2013, when he was the top running back that year, when he had over 2,000 yards from scrimmage. And, he did have 17 touchdowns in 2011, so that was a good year for him as well. But 2016, he was one of the best running backs in all of football. I still think he's a top 5 back. He still showed that he has the flashiness. He still can cut. He can make runners miss, and that he showed that this year. And when you look at his game-by-game breakdown here, game-by-game breakdown, he had games where, he had 128 against Miami. He had 150 against the Browns, but those are really bad teams, even though the Dolphins didn't make the playoffs. I look at the teams that were really good. So maybe this may have been a part of it. He only had 85 yards against Seattle. He only had 70 yards against New England. Those are on the ground. But he did have, he's always those running backs that always get you at least 100 yards. Even in Seattle, he did have 85 rushing yards, but he also had 35 receiving yards. So he did have over 100 yards in that game. When you got New England, he had 70 yards on the ground. But he had 38 yards receiving, so he had over 100 yards. He actually had a touchdown in the game, too. So pretty big fantasy day there. So from a fantasy perspective, Lesean McCoy is always going to be one of those running backs that gets you over 100 yards. I kind of feel like he was a little bit underrated this year. He's definitely RB1. Definitely RB1 by far. There's no doubt about that. But when you compare him to Ezekiel Elliott, Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson, I'm going to have to put Lesean McCoy number 4 on that list. I can't put him ahead. I can't put Jay Ajayi over Lesean McCoy. I just can't. I definitely can't put him over Jordan Howard, even though I love Jordan Howard going into this year. I think Jordan Howard is going to be even better in his second year if they can somehow get a quarterback there in Chicago. But I do think from fantasy perspective, Lesean McCoy is easily a top 5 for me. Easily a top 5 running back. And even though he didn't make this list, which I don't agree with, I do think he should at least been on this list. I think Lesean McCoy is still going to be one of the best running backs in fantasy next year. And I know he's not going to have Tyrod Taylor there, and I do think they kind of went hand in hand a little bit. But, this is going to be a run-first team as long as Shady is running the show. No matter who is the quarterback for Buffalo, this offense will go through Lesean McCoy. And, even though around 2015 when he looked like he kind of lost a step a little bit, 2016, this is honestly kind of a really good year for him. He struggled with injuries 2015 after coming over in a trade from Philly. He missed some games with injuries. Almost at times he didn't look like he was the same guy, but 2016 he was easily one of the best fantasy running backs. So from a fantasy perspective, I still think he is someone that you have to target in the second or third round. He's definitely RB1 in my eyes. So don't let him scare you. So as of right now, how I rank my running backs, and I'm gonna have to do it like this. I'm gonna have to do Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson, Ezekiel Elliott. I'm gonna have to put Lesean McCoy at number 4. Number 5 is still up in the air for me. I haven't actually put together a list of players in how I kind of want to rank them yet. So I haven't actually ranked them yet, but as of right now, those are my top 4 guys at the running back position. But a lot can change from now until then, so you guys should stay tuned for that. But, if I'm Shady, I think he has. I would be upset too. I would be really upset, and you know what? I think he has every right to be upset. So I do think this can fill him to be a very even better running back next year. But I'm going to take my second break here. I'm actually going to discuss more about this Pro Football Focus list. I'm going to tell you from a fantasy perspective, I'm going to do the best I can to break this down and how I see some of these players performing next year and fantasy. So I will discuss that when I get back to the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And I talked about the Pro Football Focus Top 100, actually Top 101 of players of 2016 that was released yesterday. I talked about how Lesean McCoy was angry. I talked about Lesean McCoy from fantasy perspective. I kind of want to talk about the rest of the list for the remainder of the show here, and I kind of want to break it down in the fantasy perspective to kind of help you guys evaluate these players for 2016. But 101 is Tyron Smith. He is a left tackle for the Dallas Cowboys, but we don't really play offensive lineman in fantasy. So I'm strictly going to talk about offensive skill players like receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, tight ends. So I'm going to strictly stick to those type of guys on this list. So Tyreek Hill was 100. He came on, he was a breath of fresh air, so to speak. He burst onto the scene. One of the most dangerous playmakers this season for the Kansas City Chiefs. Every time he touched the ball, I felt like he was going to score. By the end of the season, he had like 12 touchdowns. 12 touchdowns total. 6 times out of receiver, 3 times running the ball, and on 3 returns. So he'll average 13.1 yards every time he touched the ball as a rookie. So wow, I kind of see him kind of not. You know what? I do think he's going to be one of those gadget players to use in fantasy. He's definitely one of those flex players you got to use. And I do see him being a real contributor in fantasy. But honestly, moving forward with the Kansas City Chiefs, I do think he's someone that's going to be a huge deep threat for Alex Smith. We did see it this year. So I expect an even bigger year from Tyreek Hill. I kind of think you kind of have to pull back your expectations a little bit because, teams do have film on him. But I do think he's going to be a contributor. They're going to find ways to have Tyreek give him the ball. So he's going to score. And for the first time on the list, we got Michael Thomas at 93 here. He's a rookie. And Michael Thomas was the 6th receiver taken in the 2016 draft. I actually liked him coming out of Ohio State. He is by far the best in his first year. Honestly, it looked like he was the best receiver in this year's draft. Maybe there's the team that he was on. He doubled the receiving yards of Sterling Shepard. Michael Thomas had a great year. He looks like he's about to be a real fantasy commodity again for 2017. He caught 92 passes. He had 1,137 yards, 9 touchdowns. He had he had 9 touchdowns. The Saints got him on the field, and they just know how to work these guys. They know how to put their playmakers. They know how to find ways to get their players the ball. And I do think Michael Thomas, he's going to be a very good receiver in fantasy next year. And a former Saint actually did really good is Jimmy Graham. He makes the list at 92, and he kind of had a resurgent year, so to speak. You know, at 2015, he kind of flew under the radar a little bit. You know, he didn't have a kind of a good year, but 2016, he still proved that he is still a matchup nightmare. He proved to be a fantasy tight end again. He was just one of those big players for the Seattle Seahawks offense. And, you know, it looks like since Russell Wilson looked like he kind of, you know, he kind of played without a running game this year, and that was impressive in my opinion. So I do think that Jimmy Graham is someone that you kind of really have to look at as a fantasy tight end next year. And one of the players that did make it as a rookie, Jordan Howard, he was a guy that I liked. He's a guy that I had on my team. He was number 75. He didn't start till week 4. And if he would have started week 1, he probably would have had a lot more yards. He was the second best rookie running back this year. You know, Ezekiel Elliott finished well over 1,600. You know, Jordan Howard averaged 5.2 yards per attempt per carry. He averaged 3 yards per carry after contact per 40 tackles and 252 attempts. So Jordan Howard looks like he's one of those tough running backs to take down. And Chicago always drafts good running backs. And I feel like a lot of people are sleeping on him this year. So I do think Jordan Howard is someone you have to take in the early rounds in fantasy football. And Jordy Nelson, he makes the list at 74. You know, 2016, you know, from a fantasy perspective, for Jordy Nelson was one of the top receivers. He finally came back into the scene. He led the league in touchdowns with 14 touchdown receptions, 97 he caught 97 passes, 1,257 yards, only had 4 drops. So it looks like Jordy Nelson still looks like he's going to be one of the top receivers in fantasy, and I'm looking forward to having him on my team if I can get him. But it looks like Jordy Nelson's not going anywhere, and I'm expecting a very big year from Jordy Nelson, and I'm expecting a big year from not Jordan Rodgers. I'm sorry, that's his brother, Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, I'm expecting a huge year from Aaron Rodgers. And as for other guys on the list, you know, Derek Carr makes it at 50. I can talk about him all day. But the guy that made the list at 51 is Odell Beckham Jr. He was taken very high in fantasy leagues this year. And, you know, Odell Beckham Jr., he did have 100 receptions. He did have 1,367 yards. He did have a really good year. He scored 10 times. But I do think that his playoff performance kind of got him ranked this kind of low. But, you know, despite the fact that Odell Beckham Jr. was ranked 51, I still think he's one of the top receivers in the game. He may be low inconsistent. But I think heading to fantasy, I don't know if he's worth drafting in the first round. I do think that he's one of those players that you take a risk with. I think he's better suited as a second round pick. I kind of think he kind of falls with Des Bryant, so to speak, in that kind of category. But I do think, though, Beckham, you know, despite his numbers, you know, I kind of feel like he could have did better. So, you know, I do think he's someone that should be targeted in the second or third rounds. He's probably going to be taken in the second round because of his name. But my favorite player from this year is number 37. That's Travis Kelce. I just love the way Travis Kelce plays the tight end position. I still think he is I honestly think he's the second best, maybe third best fantasy tight end heading to next year. I still rank Gronk at first because Tom Brady is still the guy. He's still the quarterback there. But Travis Kelce had a breakout year. They finally, you know, opened it up for Travis Kelce. He ended up being probably the most productive player in the Chiefs offense. Kelce racked up 1,125 yards. That's the most in the league among tight ends. He amassed 7.7 yards per reception after catch. So he is one of those guys that that really makes small receptions turn to long, big plays. So that really helps out Alex Smith. Alex Smith did not throw an interception when targeting Kelce. So, that kind of tells you the value of Travis Kelce in fantasy. That kind of tells you the type of guy he is for the Chiefs. And I do expect him to be another player, big-time player in fantasy again. But one of the top running backs I think that's going to be targeted very high next year is Jay Ajayi. He made the list at 31. But I was reading the report from Pro Football Focus that really kind of impressed me here. He was part of the reason that the Dolphins season did turn around. He ended the year with 1,272 yards. But the thing that really caught my eye is he gained 900 yards after contact. The Miami offensive line looked like it was pretty bad, but man, Jay Ajayi pretty much made this. He looked like he made this offensive line better. Jay Ajayi was probably one of the hardest back in the game to take down. He broke a league high 58 tackles, 11 more than anybody, even though he ranked 15 attempts. So I do see Jay Ajayi being I see him being a focal point for the Dolphins next year. But I think with teams having tape on him, I kind of think he might have a kind of a letdown. But I do think he's someone that's going to be targeted very high in the draft. I think probably in the second or third round. But Le'Veon Bell, he did make the list at 27. I still think he's going to be a top 3 pick. Ezekiel Elliott makes that 22. David Johnson at 23. I still think these are going to be I think Ezekiel Elliott, David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, I think these are going to be the top 3 guys that are going to be taken in the draft. Not in particular order. Antonio Brown, in my opinion, who's going to be the first receiver taken again in the draft, in fantasy drafts, he's only at 21. Mike Evans made it ahead of him at number 12. I kind of have a little bit of a problem with that because I do think that Antonio Brown is still the best receiver in the game from a fantasy perspective. But don't get me wrong, Mike Evans is a great receiver as well. I just feel like Antonio Brown, he kind of scares you no matter who's the quarterback is. He's going to find ways to make plays. So, like I said, Mike Evans did make it at number 12. He had a real good year. And as for the top 10, from a fantasy standpoint, we got guys like Julio Jones making it at number 6. Great year. Matt Ryan, number 5, the MVP. We got Aaron Rodgers at number 3. We have Tom Brady at number 1. So there's really no surprise there in the top 10 regarding the skilled players. And from a fantasy perspective, I can see Tom Brady finish again. Aaron Rodgers, I see him having another great year. I see Matt Ryan having a great year. He might kind of fall back a little because of Kyle Shanahan leaving as the offensive coordinator. But I do expect Julio Jones to be another great receiver. He might be the second best receiver in fantasy. He might be the second receiver taken in multiple fantasy drafts next year. But, enough about this list. It remains to be seen how 2017 is going to shake out. But, we will be here every step of the way for you guys. So that's going to conclude my show today. I thank you guys for tuning in. Anthony will be back on Friday. We will be talking anything fantasy football related. But, you can catch this show on a variety of platforms on Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, and on the website gsmcpodcast.com. You can follow the show on multiple social media outlets, Twitter and Instagram. The handle is at GSMC_F-football, and then on Facebook, the page to like is the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Jeremiah. You guys have a good day. And for you guys celebrating Valentine's Day, have a good day with your loved ones, guys. Have a good day.